So the Friday the 13th franchise has been a series that's always been dear to my heart ever since I was a kid. Mainly because I grew up watching all of those movies from the first one all the way to part 10. And yes, I do prefer Friday the 13th slightly a little bit more than Halloween, but it's a biased opinion because I grew up with Friday the 13th first, and then I eventually saw the Halloween series. Now mind you, even though I prefer Friday the 13th a little bit more than Halloween, I do understand what people mean when they say Halloween's better, because obviously Halloween, especially the original film, it's a staple to the slasher film genre. And just like last week how we ranked the Halloween film series from the worst to best, I figured let's do the exact same thing with Friday the 13th. Before I even begin though, I just want to say that these are not going to be full-on fledged reviews of each film. I'm just going to give a retrospective of the things that I found interesting and the things that I did not like about each film. So don't expect this to be a very detailed review. I'm just going through each film, the things that I liked, and that's it. Quick disclaimer though, I will not be talking about Freddy vs. Jason, mainly because I consider that movie to be a crossover film between Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. On this video, I'm mainly focusing on the main installments of the Friday the 13th franchise, which focus mainly on Jason. So without further ado, let's get started. So my least favorite Friday the 13th film, if I could even call it that, is Jason X. So right off the bat, this movie, I personally can't consider it part of the Friday the 13th series, quite frankly, because the main driving power of each Friday the 13th film, it was that each took place in Camp Crystal Lake. These movies were about a killer that was stalking teenagers in a campsite and then eventually killing each, with one survivor getting out at the end. That was the theme of each film, at least for the most part. And I get that eventually they started changing things up a little bit as the series went through, but Jason X was way too over the top and shouldn't have been made. The movie starts off in the year 2008, and Jason has been held captive already. So basically here all the movies have happened, including Freddy vs. Jason, and he ends up getting frozen. Then the movie skips to the year 2455. Yeah, 400 years. And this, I don't even know how to describe it. So the main characters in this movie, they travel to Earth, which is now a wasteland. They find his frozen body, they take him onto a ship, and well, the rest is history. He starts killing people one by one, he gets killed, and he comes back as a cyborg. That's basically it. What I did like about this movie were their kills. I mean, I will say that the kills were very unique in this movie compared to the previous films. One example being when Jason just wakes up, he grabs one of the girl's heads and he dumps her face in liquid nitrogen, causing it to freeze, and then he just smashes her face in the counter. And it's like, what? That was just too over the top, but nonetheless very entertaining to watch. Most of the characters in this movie, they're pretty much flat. The only character that is a little interesting is the robot known as KM13 I believe, and she's the one that eventually ends up killing Jason. But she does not kill him. He ends up getting an upgrade from this machine that can bring you back to life, it seems, and he comes back as this cybernetic cyborg thing, What? Just like I said, Friday the 13th has always been a campy franchise about kids in the woods getting killed by this zombie-like creature, I will say though that Jason's design in this movie, both his classic look and his upgrade, they look pretty cool. Kane Hodder as Jason, always spot on. This movie, it would have been good if it was not Friday the 13th. Just remove Jason Voorhees out of the picture and make it its own story and it would have been okay. But it has Jason in it. It's part of the Friday the 13th franchise, and that's why it's my least favorite Friday the 13th film. Now we're moving on to Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. So this is basically New Line's first take on the Friday the 13th franchise after Paramount Pictures sold the rights of the film series. And right off the bat, this was a rocky start for New Line because they mistreated Jason so badly in this movie. I mean, right off the bat, the whole thing about Jason going inside different people like a little slug, that's really stupid. In this movie, it doesn't even explain how Jason came back from Manhattan back to Camp Crystal Lake. He just pops up like nothing. He starts off chasing this random girl that's renting a cabin, but we've come to find out that she's actually part of the FBI, and all of this was just a trap to lure Jason in. So he gets blown up, everybody thinks he's dead, then this doctor, he starts getting tempted to eat the brains when he's doing the autopsy. And that's when Jason starts going from person to person. Now, mind you, as far as the plot goes, I do like how they started including his family in this movie, like his half-sister. And the whole thing about Voorhees being the only one to kill Jason and send him to hell, that was pretty interesting. But with them bringing the Book of Necronomicon from the Evil Dead series, that was... I was like, what? Like, that's the one thing that I don't like about Friday the 13th being under New Line Cinemas. They started gaining control of this film and adding random shit to it that made absolutely no sense. Now, don't get me wrong, Jason's design in this movie, even the small parts that show Jason, he looks pretty cool, and he looks very worn out after all the beatings, burns, stabs, everything he's gone through. He looks like, you know, he's been through some shit. And once again, Kane Hodder comes back as Jason, and he makes an outstanding role once again. Throughout this movie, Jason's just switching from bodies, and he's just killing different people. And it feels you're not even watching Friday the 13th anymore. You're watching some other supernatural horror, you know? The one thing I could say that I did love about this movie, that I really hyped me up, was the ending itself. And as the camera starts to zoom into Jason's mask, whose arm comes out? None other than Freddy Krueger's, and he grabs the mask, leaving the doors open for Freddy vs. Jason. That was fucking epic, I will tell you that. Moving on to Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. It's not that I hate this movie. The thing that just kills the movie for me is Jason's absence. Because we're led to believe throughout the film that Jason's back, but he ends up getting killed, and you end up seeing that the killer was just a copycat. So this film takes place a couple of years after the end of the final chapter, and the kid that ended up killing Jason in that movie, Tommy Jarvis, he's now a grown man. But he's still having nightmares about Jason, he's still hallucinating about Jason, so he's not fully there to say. The events of the previous film where killing Jason really got to his head. The killings are alright. I'm not gonna say that they sucked, but I'm not gonna say they had the best kills. But, you know, it was okay. I don't know, I feel like this movie is just... I don't know, I can care less for it, to be honest. And I don't know, me personally, I just don't like the fact that Jason's absent in this movie. And I know they probably wanted to try something new, like maybe get a new killer or a new Jason or something like that. But, I don't know, it just didn't work for me. Now we're moving on to Friday the 13th, the reboot. So as far as this reboot goes, I can't really consider it to be a remake, mainly because this movie takes place after the original Friday the 13th. It even shows a recreation of the ending of the first film. So this movie is just retconning everything else but the first film. So it's technically just a standalone sequel, you could say. So this movie starts off with a group of teenagers heading to Crystal Lake to camp out, have sex, you know, teenager stuff. But the only difference from this film and the other films is that Jason actually, he kills the rest of the characters, but he keeps one girl, Whitney. And the main reason is because he feels that she has a very strong resemblance to his mother. So I don't know if he wants to keep her because he thinks she's his mother, or I really have no idea. But he keeps her around, and that's something we've never seen of Jason. So a couple of weeks pass by, and another group of teenagers decide to go to Camp Crystal Lake to do the same teenager stuff, you know, camp out, have sex, get killed. But at the same time, there's this other guy named Clay, who's actually Whitney's brother, and he's searching for Whitney. So he ends up crossing over with these guys, and they seem to, they don't really seem that bad towards him, except this one douchebag, I don't remember his name, but he's the main leader of the group, and he doesn't want to help out Clay. He's just being a douchebag. He's just being a complete dickhead and just telling him to leave and even threatening him. So you want this guy to get killed. Not to mention he's the same asshole from the Transformers movie. So Clay ends up finding Whitney finally. They get reunited and they try to escape. And that's basically it. As far as Jason goes, I really did like his design in this movie, mainly because it's kind of like a blend between Jason's design in Freddy vs. Jason and his design in Part 3. I mean, he's not too much of a zombie, but he has the posture and the clothes like in Freddy vs. Jason. And his mask is very resemblance to the one from Freddy vs. Jason 2. Next movie is Friday the 13th, the original. Now wait, I know what a lot of people are going to jump on the boat and say, how can you put the original so low? Well, I'll tell you, because I didn't see the original Friday the 13th first. My first film was, well, we'll get to that in a little later, but I grew up seeing the Jason movies where Jason was in the films, not the ones where he wasn't. Since I was already a fan of Jason, I really wasn't too interested in the films that he was absent. Similar to Friday the 13th Part 5, where he's not in that movie. Kind of like the same thing with this movie. But nonetheless, I do respect the fact that this is the original film and it's what started it all. In this movie, it's not Jason that's the killer, but rather it's his mother, Pamela Voorhees. She is just going on a rampage on the counselors, quite frankly, because she blames them for Jason's death. And, I mean, her killings are pretty basic, pretty simple. Nothing too crazy or too over the top. The ending to this movie, though, is classic. With Alice, you know, finally putting an end to Pamela's rampage on Camp Crystal Lake, and she's just strolling through a boat, nice and relaxed, when all of a sudden, Jason comes out and grabs her. That part, honestly, for the first time that I saw it as a kid, that scared the shit out of me, because Jason looks ugly in this movie. I mean, he's always looked ugly, but like the way they make him look in this movie as just a dead child, it's, I don't know, I thought it was disturbing at first. But yeah, I do respect the fact that Friday the 13th is the original. It's what started the franchise. But me personally, it's not one of my top favorites, mainly because Jason's not in it. Next, we're going to talk about Friday the 13th Part 2. So this film is when they finally introduced Jason for the first time as the killer. Like, I don't see a lot wrong with this movie itself. But again, me personally, My favorites are the ones where it shows Jason in his prime, if that makes sense. In this movie, Jason's just this scrawny looking dude wearing a potato sack on his head. And while his kills aren't that great, I mean, at least he's starting, you know, he's starting to roll the ball in his kills. So I really don't have any gripes towards Friday the 13th Part 2, but, you know, it's not one of my top favorites. But I do like the fact that they finally introduced Jason as the main antagonist of the franchise. Next, we're going to talk about Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. So when this movie just came out, it was panned by the critics. A lot of people didn't like it, which eventually led to Paramount Pictures selling the rights to New Line. But, I don't know, me personally, I saw the movie and I thought it was pretty damn cool. They basically get Jason out of his comfort zone. He ends up, you know, stalking and killing a bunch of teenagers in a ship. And he ends up landing in New York City. I mean, as far as this franchise goes, you know, I think it started in Part 6, where I think they themselves were aware that these movies were cliche. So they played around with that, and they put emphasis on it while trying to keep it, you know, suspenseful and everything. They also brought in a little bit of corniness, and I like that. Like in that scene where Jason's chasing the two main characters, and there's these guys, these rocker kids just listening to the radio, and what does Jason do? He just kicks the radio off, and then so the kids get all upset and they just start pointing their knives into him. He does, instead of just going off and killing them easily, he just removes his mask and they take off right away. That part was just, I don't know, the first time that I saw it, I started laughing way too hard about that. That was just, I never expected Jason to do that. Another part that I thought was pretty funny was when he just lands in New York City and he sees this hockey store, and the big logo shows a giant hockey mask that looks just like his, and it even shows him being a little curious, like, huh, is that me? That part was pretty silly. So one thing I didn't like about this movie was Jason's design, mainly because, I don't know, for some reason throughout this movie Jason looks so slimy and gooey, and I don't get why. Mind you, I do get that he comes out of the Camp Crystal Lake, but in the other films he doesn't look like this. I mean, yeah, he comes out wet and stuff, but he ends up getting dry and, you know, it's whatever. But in this movie, throughout the entire movie from start to finish, looks the same, so gooey, and it feels like if you touch him you're gonna be covered in slime. I don't know, I didn't like his design in this movie. I didn't like the mask either, the way the arrows were pointing up, and I know it's not a reason to bash the film, but those are just a couple of my minor complaints. Next, we're gonna talk about Friday the 13th Part 3. And this is the first time we actually get to see Jason wear his traditional hockey mask. And we also get to see him a little more bulkier in this film. So from Part 3 and onwards, we see Jason with the mask, and he looks all, you know, bulked up. In comparison to the last movie where he was all completely skinny. It's in this movie where the kills finally start to get a little bit more, you know, gruesome, a little bit more savage. Because in the first film, Jason was absent. In the second film, they were, you know, kind of similar to the way his mom killed. But in this film, that's when things start really to pick up. It's like if the hockey mask was the thing that he needed to become this savage monster. The characters in this movie, they're not really that interesting in my opinion. They're just like whatever, like the generic characters from a slasher film. But nonetheless, this movie is entertaining to watch. And if you want to see Jason's very first appearance with his traditional look, then you should definitely check this movie out. Now, Friday the 13th, Part 4, the final chapter. So this movie was intended to be the finale of the franchise, but we all know how far that went. Jason X. This movie, for the first time in the franchise, they actually introduced an interesting character that's not Jason, that being Tommy Jarvis. So Tommy in this movie, he's a little boy, and he ends up reappearing in Part 5 and Part 6. But in this film, the main thing that stands out in this film is that out of all the other adults that end up getting killed, it's this kid that he ends up being the one that puts an end to Jason, at least for a while. Nonetheless, if this film was the last movie in the franchise, it would have been a fitting ending, but because of marketing and money, they decided to keep on going. This movie could have been the perfect ending to the franchise, because not only do they tie the knot with Jason by killing him, but it ends with Tommy having this very disturbed smirk on his face, and it makes you question, can he be the killer? And now we're moving on to Friday the 13th, Part 7, A New Blood. So in this movie, it's when they start to really introduce the whole supernatural aspects of Jason. I mean, apart from just reviving him, but they also introduce this girl named Tina, who she's basically the carry of this film, because she has telekinesis and she can move things around, throw things around. And the movie begins with her accidentally killing her father in Camp Crystal Lake. A few years pass by, she's older now, she comes back. She tries to revive her dad, but she ends up reviving the wrong person. And we all know who that wrong person is. And yeah, Jason's back, starts killing, same as usual. But there's a twist. Unlike in previous films that people really can't stop Jason, this girl, she really puts up a fight. Weird thing that somebody else that's, you know, not normal, they start challenging Jason. Apart from Freddy Krueger, which we hadn't seen, you know, when this movie came out, we've never really seen somebody to actually stand up to Jason like that. I thought it was entertaining, especially the scene where she starts like really, you know, tightening his mask to the point where it breaks. And my #1 favorite Friday the 13th film is Part 6, Jason Lives. So this movie, the reason why I consider it to be my personal favorite, and I know it's gonna sound completely biased, but it was because it was the first movie that I saw. Not only that, but this movie also marks the return of Jason after his absence in Part 5. This movie takes place after the end of A New Beginning. Tommy Jarvis, he's still going through hallucinations and everything, but he wants to put an end to all of his traumatic thoughts once and for all by going to a grave and just stabbing Jason's corpse. But that is one mistake that he's gonna regret, because the piece of fence that he uses to stab Jason, he leaves it there, and what happens? Lightning strikes and it brings Jason back to life. This movie makes it aware that you should not be taking these movies full on serious. Like, it has its suspenseful moments with the killings, as it should, but it also intentionally embraces, you know, cliche jokes and stuff. Like in the scene where a woman, she's driving with her husband, and she kind of breaks the fourth wall by saying that that it's not a good idea when there's some guy in a mask right in front of you or something like that. That was, I mean, she's basically just describing the Friday the 13th franchise, you know? Or even Halloween. I like the fact that starting from this movie, they started to embrace that they are a slasher film franchise, but they aren't to be taken full on serious. Another scene that I thought was pretty funny is with the paintballers, that they even put this funny Boy Scout type of music as they go, and he just starts killing them one by one. I thought that was pretty interesting too. So in this film, they reopened Camp Crystal Lake now under a new name, and obviously Tommy Jarvis knows that this is not a good idea because Jason's back. So throughout the film, he's just warning the sheriffs, warning the camp that Jason's coming back, but the sheriffs don't believe him. They think he's the one that's doing the kills, which makes absolutely no sense, even after they see, you know, bodies being found. But I like the fact that unlike the other films in the franchise, they actually start using real kids in this film. I mean, obviously this is a camp for kids, but in none of the films you get to see children. But in this movie you actually do, and it brings this dynamic that we've never seen before, because even Jason breaks into the house where there's kids. One thing that a lot of people don't point out that I think is pretty interesting in Jason's character is that he doesn't kill kids. Because if you notice, he breaks into the kids' cabin, but he doesn't kill them. He has no interest in the kids. He just wants to kill his targets, being Tommy Jarvis and the other grown-ups. And it only makes sense considering the fact that in his mind, it's the camp counselors, it's the grown-ups that are the ones responsible for him drowning and for his mother's death. So it's just crazy that a zombie-like character like Jason has this sort of character development in him. I thought it was pretty interesting because it's a total contrast compared to killers like Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers, where they actually do have intentions on killing children too. Jason, on the other hand, he doesn't. But going back to the plot, Tommy ends up luring Jason into a trap in the lake. He ends up tying him up, hanging him, and even the motor of the boat starts cutting him off, which looks kind of gross. And he ends up thinking that he finally killed Jason. But even though we the audience know that Jason's not dead, at least we know that Tommy can finally have this closure with Jason, and he does in this movie. He finally puts his hallucinations to an end after this film. One reason why I didn't mention the music in the Friday the 13th movies is mainly because for the most part it's all the same. I mean, it's not bad, but it's for the most part, it does not change. But with part 6, not only did they enhance the music compared to the first few films, but they also included an Alice Cooper song, He's Back, you know, the man behind the mask. And it's phenomenal. I mean, just have a listen to it and you're gonna see what I'm talking about. The song just goes perfectly with that 80s vibe, and it goes perfectly with Friday the 13th. But yeah, that is my personal favorite Friday the 13th film. Nonetheless, even though I rank these films from least to best, I still love the franchise as a whole. It's one of my favorite slasher film series, apart from Halloween. And yes, even Jason X, that extremely over-the-top science fiction piece of crap, I enjoy watching it, I'm not gonna lie. And that's basically it, guys. I just wanted to give my quick retrospective of the Friday the 13th films. Again, this wasn't meant to be a huge review on it, just a recap of the things that I find interesting in each film. What's your ranking in the Friday the 13th movies? I would love to hear it, so comment in the section down below. And quick message though, guys, I apologize for the lack of workout videos. I've been extremely busy with school and work, so when it comes to doing workout videos, it's more time consuming. So I've only been able to cram out these vlog type of videos, so my apologies for that. Workout videos are coming, just be a little patient. And yeah, hope you're having a wonderful Friday the 13th. I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.